Echo, although apparently it had some mixed reviews, I do think it's a slam dunk masterpiece show. It was created by Marion Dayre. She worked on Better Call Saul. Echo, episode 1. Maya watches the man's hand and she sees that his right hand is shaking. She takes advantage of that and she just tosses him like he's nothing. And nothing is random. Everything is about where the story is going. And then one of the guys starts fighting her. She gets her arm wrapped around his neck and cracks it. And you see the look in her eyes. You're seeing her go through the emotion of the experience of just, oh my God, and that's what I'm talking about. This is how you look at action. I'm Matt Salanoa, and welcome to Action Movies, Storytelling Through Action, special television edition. This is a special television edition. Maybe I'll do action television someday. I don't know. But I'm doing a special episode. This is about the first episode of Echo, the Disney Plus series from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I have a whole episode for Why It's Great Television. Hopefully that comes out by the time this is coming out. I don't know yet. It's all being done as fast as I can, and I can't move that fast because I got so much to do. But I really loved the show Echo. So I'll get into that. That's a full episode of Why It's Great Television, my new podcast where I talk about TV shows I've been watching and what makes them great from a filmmaker's point of view. So that episode should be coming out, but it may not. Either way, I will have a full review on why I love that show, why I think it's an excellent piece of television, and you should totally check it out. It was created by Marion Dayre. I still don't know your name, I'm sorry. But she worked on Better Call Saul for 21 episodes. Fantastic show. And her talent and her handling of storytelling 100% contribute to a fantastic show where we get to see Echo, who was introduced in the show Hawkeye. She's an assassin who worked for Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin, and by the end of that show becomes an enemy of the Kingpin. And the show Echo is all about her mini war with the Kingpin that takes place back in her hometown, the Choctaw Nation Reservation. Really excellent show. I can't recommend it highly enough. But I'm just here to talk. This is a special television episode of Action Movies, Storytelling Through Action, because I want to get into how the action tells the story for the first episode of this show. So I won't be spoiling too much for the entire show because I have a whole other podcast for that. But I just want to talk about, if you're a young director, if you're a filmmaker, and unfortunately I don't have the director's info, but I'll put it here, and I'll put the IMDb and the link below. I highly recommend watching Echo all the way through, but I'll only be talking about the action in the first episode because I really want to talk about how action is a part of the storytelling. That's the goal of this podcast, to help young directors, or even if you've been at the game, have the confidence and understanding what your role is, and understand that action is not something that should just be handled by some stunt team. Okay, I think that's where you get into shitty action movies. No offense to stunt coordinators and stunt filmmakers. I understand that you contribute an enormous amount, and the top tier ones really know how to make a cinematic looking action sequence. But look, if you're a director, if you're a storyteller, it is just as much your job to be telling the story through the action as it is anyone else. But it's far more important that you actually understand how much you need to tell, how much is valuable to the movie, and that the action itself is a part of the storytelling. So if you just hand off your directing of an action scene to a stuntman, I think that's the wrong way to do it. John McTiernan says this about the making of Predator, which I think was his first big action picture. I can't recall. But he talked about this, where he said when he showed up to make Predator, they had a stunt guy who was supposed to do all the action directing, and he was sitting there going, well, what's the point of me being here then? It's as if the attitude was, I'm just here to direct the talking parts and someone else is going to make the action good. That's not my job. My job is to oversee every part of the filmmaking, because every part of the filmmaking is part of the storytelling. And that's what you need to understand. This is the man who made Die Hard. This is the man who made Predator. Okay? And even though he himself may not say that he's important, look, if these are some of your favorite action movies ever made, then this is coming from the director who made those movies. That even the action is a part of the storytelling. If you're a fan of Guillermo del Toro, Blade 2, Hellboy, all the movies he's made, but Pacific Rim, the finest directors who give us the best stuff understand that even action is a part of the storytelling. So with that in mind, I'm going to talk about the first episode, specifically the action that appears in the first episode of Echo, because it 100% understood that mentality. So walk with me here. It's better if you've already watched it. I do recommend you go watch at least the first episode of Echo and then come back right to this moment. And I'm going to get into how the action is a part of the storytelling. You'll already have absorbed this information, but I'm here to break it down with you so we can really pay attention to what's going on, okay? So, action movies, storytelling through action, television edition, Echo, episode 1. So, this episode starts off with a flashback of Chafa, a Native American ancestor who she's with a bunch of clay people living in a cave, and the cave is about to collapse, and Chafa uses her superpowers. Her superpowers develop in this moment, and she teleports everyone out of the collapsing cave, and they come on land, on Earth, above the cave, and their mud skin falls off and they become regular human flesh beings. It's a beautiful little opening, and this is like Black Panther, a historical telling that young Maya, young Echo, as a little, I think she's 5 or 6 or something like that, little adorable baby Echo. She's talking with her cousin, and they're telling the story, and the very next scene is that she runs home. It's raining. She wants hot chocolate, but they're out, so she and her mother get in the car, then they go on a drive, and unfortunately they end up getting hit by another car, and the mother dies. And this becomes the starting of the story, where the reason that they were hit, the reason the mother died, was a message from a competing gang, and it turns out that her father is tied up with bad people, and that's why this tragedy happened. Because the bad people were trying to kill him, but killed the mom instead. And so this sets Maya and her father to be exiled to New York. Her father goes to New York, where he has a job, and he's working for the Kingpin, who, if you don't know, if you haven't been following the Marvel Cinematic Universe or the Daredevil Netflix show, or if you don't even know about Spider-Man and his famous villain, the Kingpin is famously from the comics and the 90s cartoon, a seemingly overweight man who always wears a white suit, who is the kingpin of crime. He's essentially in charge of all crime, all organized crime in New York City, or at least he's trying to conquer all of organized crime in New York City. And he's so powerful and so wealthy. He appears to be fat, but actually it's all muscle. He's 300 pounds of muscle, Spider-Man. And in the Daredevil show, you only see him as really the villain to Daredevil. But in the Echo show, you see this whole other side of Kingpin, where actually he's very sweet to Maya. He sees young Echo, Maya, as a young version of himself, a very sweet little kid who is also capable of great strength. And so when they do go to New York, paid for by the Kingpin, Maya starts martial arts. And what I like is that even though the audience part of me is saying, "Ooh, show me this whole little fight scene," we see the beginning of her starting her training. She's clearly already had some training because she's about to get in a sparring session with another kid. And as soon as fists fly, it cuts to adult Maya with another male opponent, and Maya watches the man's hands, and she sees that his right hand is shaking. So either there's an anxiety or there's a vulnerability for her to expose. And when the guy tries to fight her, she takes advantage of that and uses his right arm to throw him over the shoulder and beat him in the fight. She just tosses him like he's nothing. And this, unfortunately, although she's established as a very strong fighter, this leads her to motorcycling over to see her father at his workshop. And that's where she witnesses Hawkeye, now dressed up as Ronin from the movie Endgame. There's a lot to explain there. Hawkeye is a superhero from the Avengers, but after the events of Avengers Infinity War, where Thanos collects a bunch of magical stones and snaps his finger, he snaps half of the universe's life out of existence, and that includes Hawkeye's family. So Hawkeye, who although he was an Avenger, becomes an assassin, and he starts killing criminals left and right in quite horrific ways. And this is something that Maya Echo witnesses. She witnesses her father getting killed by Ronin, the dark version of Hawkeye. And this destroys her, and she starts acting out. So already you see action through storytelling is occurring. So we see her as a child beginning a sparring session, cut to her as an adult, and you see how her mind works. You know, she's deaf, but so what? Her eyes are working. She's paying attention to the weaknesses of her opponent, and she's a very talented fighter. The very next action sequence, most of it is off screen and just happening through her perspective. So again, now when she's seeing Ronin kill her father and all of her father's fellow henchmen, because they all work for the Kingpin, when we're seeing it happen, it's all through her point of view, over her shoulder or looking through windows, very creatively shot. But here's again, it's an action sequence, but it's largely violence. So it's a violence that's occurring, it's loss of life, ending with the death of her father. So now she's destroyed. She's kind of lost. She doesn't know what to do. The show begins with her losing her mother. Now she's lost her father. And her very next choice, because she has no clue who this Ronin guy is. She's not part of the criminal underworld yet, so she has no means of getting any revenge. And she decides to just start causing trouble. And cut to, she's inside of some motorcycle dealership, and she's hijacking motorcycles, and the cops show up, and she decides to turn on a motorcycle and rev it up and make it fly through the window and smash into a cop car. And of course she gets arrested, but then the Kingpin shows up, and the Kingpin just waves away the cops. He's so powerful that even the cops are being told to back off, and they just listen because it's the Kingpin. Seeing that she's clearly going to just make choices that ends her up in jail, he decides to take her under his wing, further her training in martial arts and everything, and also give her a direction. Again, the action is motivating the character, which is motivating the story. Because I want us to remember that we're not just getting scenes that are cool to watch, okay? We have the establishment of her martial arts skill, which is followed by the next action scene that's the death of her father. And it's not really action as much as it's cold violence. There's some cool choreography, but the point of it is that we're seeing it through Maya's point of view, and we're seeing her being emotionally destroyed by what she's witnessing. So the story is moving forward, and she's so destroyed that she's just lost and looking for trouble. And that's when the Kingpin steps in to give her her first assignment to go and work for him. And this is what leads her to join a couple of Kingpin's men in what's supposed to be a meeting with another criminal lord. And it's actually a hit. So they're going to go hit these people, take out their team, take out the criminal boss. What I like is you see she's a little bit anxious. She's agreed to it, but she's a little bit anxious in this sequence. Then the fighting starts, and she's just watching the two guys there take on the gang, and they're like, "Hey, are you gonna do anything?" And then one of the guys starts fighting her, and she's good. She's good enough to take on the guy, but you're seeing her go through the emotion of the experience of just, oh my God. And that's what I'm talking about. It's important that the writer and director, you're not just letting the choreographer do all the work, because then you're just going to get a bunch of cool fights. And action choreographers are not always necessarily keyed into what the character's about. You leave people to their own devices, and they're just going to do what matters to them, which is making a cool stunt that looks good on camera, but has nothing to do with the character. And it's all from Maya's perspective, and the camera's wrapping around to her point of view. And when she's in the fight, we're not really seeing a bunch of crazy camera angles and crazy moves. We're seeing her go, oh my God, I'm in a fight. Oh my God. Oh, I'm defending myself. But established by our earlier action scene, right? She takes advantage of her opponent's weakness and manages to get him in a chokehold, and she gets her first kill. She gets her arm wrapped around his neck and cracks it. And you see the look in her eyes that this is what this is all about. You young directors, you young filmmakers, or even filmmakers who have been at it for a while, who like action and want to remember what's the most important thing. Watching that sequence, as soon as she kills him, a fire lights in her eyes, and she realizes that she likes what she's doing, and now she's in the fight. She's not a perfect fighter. She goes into the fight, there's a lot of chaos going on, and there's when they first show up for the meeting, there's a guy who frisks her and checks her for weapons, but he decides to grab her butt, and then she immediately twists his arm and shoves him up against a wall. And when the fight goes into crazy mode and she's made her first kill, that's the first guy she takes on after killing the other guy. And it's a good fight, but she's not perfect. She's not flawless. This is her first time being in a real fight that's not just basically a sparring match with someone in a ring where there's rules and a bell to pay attention to. So now she's in a real fight, a fight for her life, and she is winning. She is kicking butt. But then Daredevil shows up, and you just see him just whoop wholesale ass on everybody. And actually, she's the only one who can stand up to Daredevil. Everyone else is knocked out so quickly, but her skill, again, is paying attention to her opponent. And so even though she does not win this fight, you watch from beginning of the fight of her getting involved with the opposing gang to her fighting with Daredevil. You watch her go from being afraid and not knowing to gaining confidence. And she gets a few really good licks on Daredevil, but ultimately Daredevil knocks her down, and he's not even interested in her. He's just upset because whatever this fight is ruined something that he was working on. So he knocks her down. She's really the last one to fight. And as soon as she's knocked down, he just gets out of there. What's another important thing is this is showing her power scale. So we see her be a kid, we see her become an adult, and we see her in this fight get better. But the power scale is, as established with Hawkeye, she can't fight Ronan. Ronan beats her very quickly. And again, this happens with Daredevil, but she stands her own very well against Daredevil. But it ultimately ends with her being beat in battle. So another piece of action storytelling. Your hero doesn't have to win every fight. In fact, it's good if you can kind of show their growth, that she loses, but what she gained is an experience fighting a much better fighter than her. So that levels her up by fighting a much better fighter. Even though she lost, she has something to learn from. And even in the next scene with Kingpin, He says, like, you stood up against him for 5 minutes. That's much better than anyone else has ever done. Usually, when Daredevil gets in a fight with any of these henchmen, no matter what their experience level is, they're nowhere near his level of ass whoopery. So the fact that she was able to handle herself for a whole 5 minutes is huge. It really shows that she is a worthy fighter and someone who can get better over time. And then we get into a montage where she's fighting for Kingpin. And again, the montage begins with her with a little bit more anxiety, but by the end of the montage, she's a cold killer. And not only that, you see kind of colors of and shades of this is not what I want to do. When we reach the end of the montage and she has become good at killing and defeating her enemies, you see in her eyes there's this kind of blank, vacant look of this is not really me. This really is what the Hawkeye shows in her character, that, although she's this slick assassin working for Fisk, by the end of the show, when all is revealed that the death of her father, spoiler alert, was Kingpin's doing, that's when she stands up against him. But much of the show of Echo is her sort of peeling back from this life of murder and realizing what's important to her. I think it's so important that the montage includes, again, it's just a performance bit. It's not something that she explains verbally. She can't explain it verbally anyway. But you just see it in her performance. She goes from enjoying the kill, still being a bit of a nervous fighter, to getting very good at killing. And by the time she's good at killing, she's kind of not enjoying it as much anymore. It's just something that she does to please her uncle and work for him. So it's just very critical. I want you young directors to pay attention to this first episode, that here's a modern day example of the directing not just being in the hands of the stunt coordinators, okay? The directing is paying attention to where the character is emotionally and tracking that emotional journey through every single shot, where essentially the montage of her getting good at killing, we don't even barely see the action. We're seeing her reaction and how her face and her emotions change through the montage, to the point where she's a cold killer and then now she's good at it and she doesn't really want to do it anymore. It's in the performance, it's not spoken, but you see that very conflict is what the entire Echo season is about. That she wants to get out of this life, she wants to pave her own future now that she has these skills and she can do anything she wants, but she figures out what she wants by the end of the show. But this first episode has to establish the terms by which she's entered the action universe, what it means to her, how she gets good at it, and ultimately how she feels, without it being stated, how she still doesn't quite feel like she's where she belongs. So that's action through storytelling. This first episode is just rife with it. It's so good. But I really want to establish that, the reason I'm talking about this episode is because it's not just giving us cool choreography for the sake of choreography, interrupted by the talking bits, which I really felt Hawkeye had a lot of. I think this show is so much more focused on making sure the action is a part of the storytelling, because that's what good action, that's what successful action is all about. So I want you to just understand this. If you're looking to be a filmmaker, if you want to be a director, I hope that you're not just aspiring, but that you're out there creating. But as long as if this is really what you want, if your dream is to make the Hollywood movies and shows, if you want to make shows like Echo or Daredevil, if this is your dream, then you need to understand how the masters approach it. And Echo, although apparently it had some mixed reviews, I do think it's a slam dunk masterpiece show. And I do mean in every essence of the word. Although the first episode, I think it's a bit choppy, and it does require you to know Hawkeye first to get the full effect of it. I do think it works well enough on its own to get you into the Echo show. I really think that episodes 2 through 5 are the masterpiece episodes, and episode 1 is pretty damn good. But what it does best is the storytelling through action element, where we are with the character when we're in a fight scene. Everything that happens to the character in that fight scene affects the rest of the show. And nothing is random. Everything is about where the story is going, and you're just moving the pegs forward. What I'm talking about, I applied to my own movies, my own short films. I haven't made a feature yet, but I have applied it since I was 15 years old. Everything is a part of the storytelling, and I just want to encourage you to look at movies that way. When movies don't do it, you're checked out. A lot of people were checked out of the Matrix sequels because they didn't feel as connected to the character and the action. They can't articulate that because they're just audience members. But that's what's going on. When you're in the first Matrix, we're very connected to Neo and everything that's happening to him. But there's a gap between movies where a certain amount of things are not told to us, and so it's harder to dial into the action because we just don't know as much of where the character's coming from. So that's my little criticism of the sequels. But that being said, that's the strength of the stuff that works. The first Matrix, Predator, the first Spider-Man, Blade 1, Blade 2, even Blade 3 to a large extent, that the action scenes, they do matter to the larger story. It is important what happens to the character, and other things would not occur without it. This is how you look at action. This is how you, as an action filmmaker, as an action director, what makes successful action movies is the exact same thing that makes a successful drama, that makes a successful comedy. These rules are universal. What matters is that the character is keyed in and is a crucial part of what happens in the action scene, what happens that leads up to that action scene, and what happens after that action scene. Every single element matters to the storytelling. And if you don't understand that, then it's not going to matter what you do. People will not connect with your work. And look, even if you do everything right, the truth is it's always going to be a roll of the dice. The Thing is one of the greatest movies of all time, and that was not a successful movie when it came out, but still one of the greatest movies of all time. The reason it stands the test of time is because people, first of all, E.T. came out, and that was a big deal. All right, so people already loved E.T., they couldn't make room for The Thing. But over time, through home video, people getting to watch it without the baggage of what was happening in the present. The reason The Thing lasts is because it's all about character and how the characters are being pushed. The horror isn't just horrific, it's horrific to the characters and moves the story, and the story is what's happening with the characters from beginning to end. So you have to understand that although I'm talking about action movies, what I'm really talking about is universal to all movies. And that's the stuff that makes what is great. That is the stuff that separates the industry standard filmmakers from all you little fan films and stuff that's not connecting with audiences. There's a reason your stuff sucks, or even if it doesn't necessarily suck, the reason it doesn't connect is because you are not wired into how the storytelling structure is all about the character. Forget about plot, forget about whether or not you have a cool stunt. If the character's not dialed in, if the character's not affected by the events that happen in your story, what you have is a movie that no one really cares about watching. So that's why I do this. I hope you enjoyed this little episode. If you have not checked out Echo, I hope you go check it out. And hopefully by the time this episode comes out, I will be releasing Why It's Great Television, where I talk about all this stuff. That's what I've got to say. Thank you very much for watching. Mahalo and aloha, and hopefully I'll see you next time.